Eddie Harris, who, by the way, invented the instrument we're listening to. He invented the electrified saxophone. And of course, we hear how beautifully he introduces the instrument. He was also adept at piano and organ. This tune is called Listen Here. It is one of my favorites. It's from his 1967 album, The Electrifying Eddie Harris. Eddie Harris died of congestive heart failure in Los Angeles on November the 5th, 1996. He was 62 years old. This is Leid Stories. I'm Utrice Leid. And hey, somebody says that you're having an election today. It's midterm elections. It's finally here. And people are trying to figure out where are things going. I haven't been following and keeping up with the reports as such. Generally, we know that there's a lot that plagues this election. Complaints of and accusations of stymieing the vote, stifling the vote by the Republicans. We have the suppression, widespread in some areas, places like in the Dakotas, widespread suppression of the vote. We have President Trump, and this is a very interesting thing. I remarked about it. Ivanka Trump is on the trail. I thought she had a job. I didn't know that her job was campaigning, and the president has taken practically 3 months off to do a lot of campaigning. I haven't heard very much in the way of complaints about that. But anyway, things are proceeding, and we will know before too long how it turned out. But be prepared. This may very well take weeks before we know the final tally. It may take that long. There have been so many irregularities already spotted and complained about, and legal actions taken in reference to these complaints about the voting irregularities. So expect a lot of legal tussling to go on still after the election. And it may take another couple of weeks before we finally get something credible in the way of a result. So don't be too hasty. It's just look at what is happening, and you can tell where this is going. In the meantime, one of the biggest election stunts is being pulled by Donald Trump, and that is trying to provoke a violent confrontation at the border, which will help him underscore the need for this great wall that he's been talking about. And number two, it will further fire up the racist uh, tendencies and beliefs of the people, Second Amendment people, and people who generally have problems with people of color. He has literally provoked this, and by saying, of course, well, the caravan is coming to the United States. That is the march of the migrants from Central and South American countries northward to the United States, seeking asylum. And according to international law, they have a right to do that. They can seek asylum. And we have seen that many of the countries, including Mexico itself, giving them an understanding passage through, in some cases even offering help as they make their way north. This was the perfect ploy for Trump to, again, not only try to drive home the fear, because he's talked about it, watch out, these people are rapists and criminals and murderers and whatnot. So hold on to your children, watch your household as they come through. But the United States will not permit them through. The United States will not permit these refugees or would-be refugees through. In fact, he was so resolute about it that he has notified, the military that as many as 1,500 or maybe even more military personnel will be called upon to fortify the border. Actually, what he's doing is stoking the fires. This is not going to happen, more than likely, but it gives him some ammunition to continue to pound away at this idea of immigrants poisoning the purity of the United States, and therefore they must be dealt with, even forcefully. They must be dealt with. So we'll see how that works, but he has provoked it, and he has upped the ante. His language is now that of, hey, I wouldn't mind a nice little war. They can't do us very much. We have the military advantage. We just blow them away. No problem. And it also gives him even more ammunition to make the point in Congress that he needs that budget, several millions of dollars, to install the wall. So we'll see how that goes. But we come back to the election today. It will be the source of a great deal of discussion, including tomorrow when Gerald Horne will be with us, and he will help us understand the election from the point of view of history. I like the way he analyzes things, so he'll be with us tomorrow. But I wondered whether you noticed something interesting about this election. When the midterm election votes are tallied, I think it is fair to assume that we can expect to learn that it was essentially a Democrat-Republican contest with negligible showings for candidates from any other parties. So this election, among other things, would prove to be a shutout. And considering that the elections are among the most hotly contested in recent years, I think we should try and discuss what could possibly be the reason for the near total absence of other parties in the fray. I mean, this, it seems to me, would have been, at least we should have an appreciable participation by third-party candidates. And I didn't get the sense that they were there in that level of participation. So I thought I'd ask you, what are you thinking about that? Is this election going to turn out to be a return, a dramatic return to the two-party system, to the two-party state, where other people have no way of participating. Other parties are not able to talk to the people. And they certainly, either by default or they just see it as a futile effort to participate meaningfully, have a meaningful presence, or they just can't afford it. What's the deal here? And should we be comfortable with the idea that here we go, we're back to the Republicans and the Democrats? The duopoly has managed to shut out just about everybody else. Or am I reading this thing wrong? 888-874-4888 is the number to call. I wish you can share your thoughts about that so we can find out, how did this happen? It's not like the midterm elections just crept up on us. We knew that there were going to be elections. What do you think is the reason? Or am I reading this wrong? This should have been a very good opportunity for independent parties to have a presence. And if they're not running just by themselves, maybe in partnership, say, with the Democrats, and they put up a united front, but I'm not seeing any of that. I wonder what accounts for it. Jason from Connecticut, could you help us understand why we haven't seen in this election a vigorous participation of third parties?
Oh, well. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon to you, Jason.
Yes. Well, let me just say that yesterday's callers, the elderly woman who spoke very eloquently, and being that she was a child and she was with during the time of Franklin D. Roosevelt, that was very compelling of that woman. Very, very compelling, very convincing, a very good argument to vote. Then you had just as well as compelling and striking a gentleman who was very plain, spoke his mind about about how he's not going to vote, and how both parties, particularly the one who continues to trumpet and campaign for blacks and Latinos and people of color, the Democratic Party and the Progressive Movement and the whatnot, how on yesterday's call, this gentleman has referred to them as being disingenuous, basically, in a nutshell. I can't quote him verbatim, but he's very disillusioned with the Democratic Party when it comes to efforts by blacks or for our achievement. But then, because of those two contrasting arguments and contrasting perspectives, we must put this into a totality, or in the grander picture, that there are people, and you made this very clear, other ethnic groups who have benefited from the civil rights movement. And these are these are the whatnots out there. They're immigrants, the Polish, the Irish, to the Italians, the Jews of our sort, our dear people. They have benefited from the civil rights movement, and yes, they take care of their own. But however, because of to answer your question, these ethnic groups and some blacks are brainwashed to have stopgap measures, and they are in positions of power or decision-making authority within the private sector or the public sector that deny prosperity. They deny prosperity to blacks, Latinos, and Hispanics, either in the administration offices, either in politics, either in housing, and this is what you have here is a totality, or the crescendo, if you will, of 70 years, 60 years since the Civil Rights Movement, of Lyndon B. Johnson, of the 1965 Voter Registration Act. And this is how I'm segueing into answering your question. Excuse me for a minute.
You certainly sensed it, because I was going to say, well, let's get to the topic.
So what? Right. So the right to vote is memorialized, entrenched, documented in the United States Constitution. After the Civil War, after slavery, after the Emancipation Proclamation, you had the 1870 right to vote. Because of gerrymandering and domestic terrorism, Lyndon B. Johnson, 100 years later, had to pass by Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement and our dear friends who were white, Jewish, who helped us convince this man to pass the Voters Act of 1965. The Voters Act of 1965 is temporary. It's not permanent. It's not finite. They have to renew it, I believe, 5 years, then 10 years, or something like that, and then it expired in 1970 or 19 something like that. So you have these states.
But you're off topic a little bit there, Jason. I'm hoping that you could address the question raised today. What is significant, in your view, about the apparent absence of third parties in this hotly contested race? We haven't seen them participating in any visible way. Why do you think this is happening? I'm sorry?
Well, to answer your question, is that there is no financial funding, financial engine in place. There is nothing in place to fund these third parties. There is no Elon Musk. There is no Brandon from Virgin Airlines. There is no multimillionaires. There is no Oprah Winfrey's of the world. There is no Gates of Microsoft who are or even millionaires who are funding, placing their money in a strategic effort of branding, public awareness, marketing, a stable office within the 50 or 51 continental United States where you can galvanize voters to say, this is the Green Party, this is the Workers' Families Party, or this is the party of Jill Stein and the whatnot, and this is their office based in the capital of the city. That's what's not occurring. And because you don't have that funding, the financial support, combined with a cogent, strategic, flat-out strategy of a brick-and-mortar office where the third-party office is permanently located, paid for, signed by the lease, where people from that state can go and say, that's the office of an alternative party. I'm disillusioned. I'm apathetic. I'm depressed. I'm being oppressed. My voting doesn't feel like my representatives don't understand me. I voted for them. This is an alternative, and this is the third party in this particular city of this state within the 51 continental United States where I can go to. They have a website. They have marketing material. They have a plan. They have a plan of action, and that's not what's in place. It's because of the three-tier strategy that's not there. The funding, the implementation of a message, and then having the actual facilities within each state.
All right. Well, you got us started. And I think this is a very valuable discussion because we have broached it before in other races that were run. But this is remarkably significant in that I haven't seen much in the way of a credible presence in this race. And I'm wondering why and what could be done about it. Thanks so much for calling. Tom from Connecticut. Today is Connecticut Day.
Hello, Utrice.
Hello.
It is a very, very gloomy, rainy day in Connecticut. But this is an interesting conversation because I think the perception of third parties, even going back to when Ross Perot had some traction or George Nader had some traction, it's always perceived as a spoiler that if I vote for them, the other party will fractionalize the vote that we really want and what will it really mean anyway. This is kind of happening in Connecticut also. They're painting this one fellow who appears to be an independent as, just a shill to draw votes away from whatever party one person thinks that they're drawing votes away from. So it's hard to, I believe, get a message across that a third-party vote would actually mean voting for a third party and have any validity as opposed to a spoiler vote.
Okay, but is that considering how long these parties have been around? It's not like this election crept up and surprised everybody.
No, but it's just the nature of when I was very involved with the Lyndon LaRouche organization for a while. And I still believe in many of the things he put forth as programs that would benefit the public under the general welfare clause of the Constitution. A lot of things like getting rid of the Federal Reserve to allow government debt to be written off, investing in infrastructure. I lobbied to get his name simply on a ballot. But people would roll their eyes and kind of say, well, what does it mean anyway? I've been also involved with Green Party candidates and get the same response. I mean, there seems to be a knee-jerk reaction that you're shoveling sands against the tide, great ideas, but no one can ever make inroads to this. And there's no will to push this forward. I mean, Gary Null has been very vocal about this for decades. And it's just a sad situation of money, first of all, which seems to be that's it. I mean, it just comes down to that. Who has the money to put this forth and make someone then believe that this can make any kind of significant difference for them?
Okay. Thanks, Tom. Thank you for your contribution today. Khalil from South Carolina, you're on the air.
Hi, Utrice. How are you today?
Oh, fine, thanks. How about you?
Great. Like 80 degrees here today, so it's beautiful. I think that we might not be seeing the firm presence of third parties right now because people are starting to realize what happens when you deal with politics in this bicameral system. Now, these are private entities. We have to raise awareness, right? Because it's kind of perverse that we rely on private entities to enter the public sphere on a national level. That's perverse. So until we break through that door through awareness awareness, there's really no hope. But until that happens, what you have to do is use the system against itself. So that means building a coalition. Now I'm speaking from a Democratic side because Republicans have the power structure. They own everything now. So what I'm saying is that we have to get our coalitions together. The Green Party, the other, maybe some libertarians, whatever. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy is your friend, like Charles O'Tell. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy is your friend until they're not. And that's fine, whatever, that's life. But, because then you have to infiltrate, proliferate, and assume control. Because we do operate for right now in a bicameral system. But once again, until we address, it's awareness. How many people really understand that we're dealing with private entities, private clubs that we call the DNC and the RNC? And they make their own rules because they can. So when we hear folks say, well, they should lock Debbie Wasserman up. No. Well, maybe, but you can't because it's a private club. And the key is that you will not be on a ballot in every state if you don't subscribe to these private clubs.
So these coalitions that you're talking about, Khalil, how do you see, is this a viable effort in your view? Is this something that is worth undertaking, considering that we're another 2 years away from a general election?
Absolutely. And I would say it from a local level. All politics is local. Because remember, on the local level, in my opinion, your vote really does count. I can call the mayor here. I can call the city manager. I say, hey, there's trash on my street, and they'll pick it up. And as one of your callers a few days ago commented on, I think it was Jeff from Jersey. Voting on the local level, depending on where you live, can be effective. But the farther up you go in the food chain, and the reason I bring this up, yes, that's where you have to start your coalitions because a lot of us have common ground. But you see, we have to get together in coalitions. And this is why I talked about co-ops the other day. This is how you meet people who have common values. You may not agree with everything they have, but, we have to start somewhere. And until we break down this wall, because how perverse is it? That is absolutely ridiculous. A private club to enter the public sphere? And that tells you right there you're starting off with corruption. There's no way around it after that. There's really not.
Well, you see, I'm concerned that such parties that could make a difference and come together as a coalition or encourage a coalition effort, they've lost the advantage of momentum and time. They should have been out front, and that's what they should have been working on for a while leading into this election, letting people know that we are not ready yet to compete, but we're getting ready. And we need you to help us get ready. This is a major, for lack of a better term, this is a major outreach and public relations effort. But it really is so depressing that in the middle of all of this, it's not like the Democratic Party is the answer. It's just that the two parties are equally offensive, and we ought to have an answer. But silence is not the answer. They've got to do something and say something and call a convention together to find out, what happened here. These are the things. They're people with ideas of how they can make up for this lost opportunity in 2008 if they have an interest in doing that. But the silence is not a good thing. And it's very, very depressing because it was it seems to me, a total shutout of any third party effort. Mm-hmm. And we should question why. We should question why. Thanks for your call. Thanks for your contribution. Gwen from New York, how you doing?
I'm okay, Yatrice. I just got back from the polls, and I did vote, and it's packed. And that is one positive thing I can say about this election is I never saw it packed or you had to wait in line. Looked like the goddamn subway in there, and that's a good thing. So that's a positive thing for today. I also voted for Green Party. I didn't vote all the way down the line, but I mixed it up, and I did vote for the Green Party. So, the question is, why aren't they out there? I think the answer is obvious. It's people are terrified. This election I listened to Alan Nairn the other day, and I thought he gave a great analogy. He said, this election is not about electing a Democrat or Republican. It's about keeping your democracy or going full throttle fascistic. And I really think that is clear. At this point, I don't care if Bozo the Clown ran on the Democratic ticket in this particular election. The stakes are incredibly high. And I don't know if everyone understands how dangerous Trump is and how he's leading us right down the Nazi path. But I take it very seriously. And in this particular election, to me, this is not the time to discuss third parties or to do anything else. Just first, let's see if we can do something with the Congress to rein him back in or impeach him. And then the luxury conversation is the next one about how can we grow our third parties? How can we make them more complete? I agree with you as I did hold my nose on a couple of these things and went ahead and voted. But yeah, I did. I'm a person who ran for city council. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's unbelievable, the stuff that I have seen as a candidate. It's terrible. I mean, the people that hold the offices, the current offices, do everything they can to make sure that nobody else, the small candidates, even the Democratic candidates, cannot get any of that campaign funding that they from the city finance. You can't get it because in order for you to get that, you got to first get 75 people to give you money in your campaign. That's the very first thing you have to do. And if you can't clear that hurdle, you have no way of getting that money. And on top of it, the Campaign Finance Board has their own discretion. My opponent, Melissa Mark-Viverito, who was already the sitting council person for 2 years, said she needed $80,000 because there was another competitor in the race, and she thought that she needed extra money to compete with this girl. Who was this girl? This girl was somebody from the Bronx that nobody ever heard of before. But you know what? They went ahead and they didn't even question her. I'm pretty sure it was illegal. They gave her $80,000 right off the bat, only for asking for it. She didn't have to do anything other than ask for that increase, and she got it. So it's clearly a rigged, flawed, terrible system. I agree 100%. But in this election, I am pretty sure that no one has ever seen anybody like Trump. And I am also pretty sure that people in Germany who were fighting over this, whether or not who Hitler was and how serious he was. I think we've learned that lesson, that people like this, he's a psychopath and he's in charge. And whatever we can do to rein him back in, we have to do it. Even if you have to vote for a stinky candidate that you don't like to block the Republican Party, because the Republican Party has signed on under the lunacy bill, I think we should call it. Under the Lunatic Act, they've gone ahead and signed their John Hancock and said, we're okay with this nutcase running the country. We'll do everything we can to support him. And they are. So I think at this point, people are coming out because of fear. They're just plain old fear. And
yes, but all of this that you're talking about, and you're making absolutely valid points here, but it requires organization. It requires not just you and then Fred and Mary individually taking action without each other. No,
it takes a willingness.
There has to be something, it seems to me, like a convention.
I think so.
Of minds about this.
Right. Okay. So can I just get in on there? I just want to say that I agree with you. But I got to tell you something, Yatrice. We sit on our asses and we complain an awful lot. I didn't get this, boo-hoo, I didn't get that, boo-hoo, and I'm not going to vote, I'm going to play takeaway because I didn't get what I wanted. Well, you know what? That's just not how life is. And you're not ever going to get your whole package. Nobody gets a whole package out here. But if you don't participate in the slightest bit other than complaining, you get nothing. And you know what? Most people don't participate in any local elections whatsoever. They don't even know how to read the questions when they come in. They don't go to community boards. They don't even go to tenant meetings in their buildings. I mean, we have to look into ourselves too and take some responsibility for the lack of representation. Because when you don't show up in life, you don't get anything in life. And I don't see people showing up. I don't see people showing up even to go to parents don't even go to teacher conferences. Everybody's on their phone. Everybody's eating as much fattening food as they can, and trying to just block out life and get as much of the gusto as they can. And then people want to turn around and complain. But it takes hard work to make the changes you're talking about, and it takes
absolutely. But I'm still saying, we just
who do you see that's out here making that commitment? Anybody?
Well, this is the question. You can't look to everybody to save you. You know what I mean? At some point, you have to understand that you're a necessary part of the formula. So you're going to have to get active. And I agree with you 100% on that. The question is, it should be noted, it should not go unnoticed, that we have one of the hottest elections in recent years. And we're not hearing from so-called independent or third parties. They've been shut out, or they have allowed themselves to be shut out of the process.
Right. I don't think they're shut out. I think they're purposely holding back.
Okay. Either way, they're not communicating with their people. They're not telling people what, if they're holding back, why, or if they think they've been shut out, why. There has to be a very strong effort now more than ever to make contact with your people. Silence is just not going to do it.
No, it's not. But I would say in this kind of an election, where they have very little chance of winning. But what they could do is they could take a close election and they could spoil it. That is true. They could do that. And so I think that because we're not fighting over Democrat and Republican right now, we're not fighting over abortion rights. We're fighting over, are we going to go to full throttle fascism? Because you know that Trump has the right now, he's going to go ahead and start working on the Constitution. He's got Kavanaugh in there and he's going to start dismantling it. And he can do it. We have no recourse other than if you can somehow manage to get the House and the Senate. If you can get those two, maybe at least you could just block a bit. But right now, because of the way the Supreme Court sits, the stakes are a lot higher than local politics. I think the stakes at this point are we going to stay alive or are we going to die? Because this man is a total raving lunatic, racist. You know, I mean, I'm just, telling my friends, people who don't want to come out. You don't want to come out, and you're not white. When you have an X on your back, because this man breathes fire. He is full of hate, and all he has to do is talk a little bit about it, and his minions line up and start shooting. And I see that as a very realistic thing that could happen. I don't think that's alarmist. I think that little bit you saw in Pennsylvania is the tip of the iceberg of what President Trump is capable of. And he doesn't even have to say, go shoot.
Thank you, Gwen. Thanks for your input today. Patricia from New York, you're on the air.
Good afternoon, Yatrice, and good afternoon to the PRN family.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you.
You know, I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and I have to share the comments of other callers that I have never seen a midterm election, the turnout for a midterm election than I have seen today. You would think that this was a presidential election. Since this morning, I got up at 6 o'clock and said, I can go later on, like around 9. Well, by 7:15, the lines were at least a half a mile long, and it has continued at that pace all day. But I think, and so this is what I did. I voted for Shirley Chisholm and Jumaane Williams. for governor and lieutenant governor. And then I was somewhat disappointed because the rest of the ballot, I was looking for Green Party candidates to vote for, and in the other major categories, there was no candidate under the Green Party, and I was somewhat surprised at that because I would have thought that there would have been at least somebody in those other posts, and there weren't. But I want to share with Gwen because I listened to her and she sounded as though we were somehow not aware of the stakes of why it was so important to get out and exercise the right to vote today, as if we're somehow clueless. And I shared with a friend of mine, you look at New York. New York is overwhelmingly black and brown. The city council is overwhelmingly black and brown, and yet still the city council speaker is a white male. In a city that's overwhelmingly black and brown, a city council is overwhelming. It's as if there is an apartheid system here in New York City. So now when you extrapolate that nationally, we've survived worse than this. We're not being lynched yet. We're not hanging from trees yet. It's not as if we don't know what the stakes are. We do know what the stakes are. And, I share with my friend, we have to now begin to do something different. We got to start talking about doing something different. The Tea Party came from somewhere. And so we really have to begin to seriously consider other third-party candidates other than the Libertarian and the Green Party. We've got to figure out a party that's going to work for us. Years ago, Automatics tried to get the Freedom Party here on the ballot in New York, and of course, the governor at the time made certain that did not happen because we did get those 50,000 votes. Where they disappeared to, nobody will ever account for them. But we've got to figure out a third party other than the Green Party and the Libertarian Party that we can put our hats on, and that's all I have to say.
All right. Thank you, Patricia, for contributing today. David from Brooklyn, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm going to try to stick to your question, and because I think it's important for people to understand that the ruling class who runs the country, and they have their two parties, the Democrat and Republican, they have a wonderful formula for keeping control in their hands. For example, in every state, the state government controls who votes, and they are able to do whatever's necessary to make ballot access very difficult for anybody from any other party, and near impossible, or provide so many hurdles that you have to jump over that they can freeze any other party out. So they have a wonderful system. Both of them are capitalist parties, Republican, Democrat, and they keep things in their hands, and they have the masses of people running around, either supporting one division of those two groups, which are really one party, Republicans and Democrats. And so they have it made whether the Republicans win or the Democrats win. So this is a system of capitalism. Capitalism and democracy do not go. They're not compatible. They can't be put together. And this is a wonderful way they have of controlling the masses of all the people that live in this country. So that is my analysis of what's going on. So the first thing you have to do if you're going to change something is find out what's happening. And, most people don't understand. They think that you can, pull a lever for the Democrats or the Republicans and things are going to work for you. But the ruling class controls both of those parties. So this system is a brilliant system for those who rule, And we've got to recognize that before we think about doing something else.
Well, we certainly have to accelerate things, but I would start with the fact that these smaller parties ought to break the silence and explain what the heck happened to them and what they're hoping in the near future to accomplish, and let us understand what the challenge was for them. But this was a devastating thing to happen, where we have the rise again of the absolute two-party system, and
yes, I agree with
they're
you.
shut out of everything.
Yes, well, they're shut out of everything. They don't have media access like the two crooked parties that run the place or groups, and they have a lot of things that are against them, so that they can't reach out to the point where most people are informed of what's going on. So that is the biggest problem. So
Yes, but you know what, David? People should not have to discover that they're not on the ballot today.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It should. Some effort should have been made to tell people, here is where we are, and this is what we are thinking about, and what we're thinking about is our next move. We won't.
I agree.
We have to do something in the future, in the near future we will, but don't just not be there. That doesn't work. Yeah. Thanks so much for your call.
All right.
Marty, thank you. Marty from Connecticut, you're on the air. Connecticut is pretty big today.
How are you today?
I'm hanging in, Marty. How about you?
Oh, I cannot complain. I'm going to attack the problem, I think, from a different angle with respect to the two-party system. I do not disagree with what I've heard, and I understand that money is a problem. And I would say that the plurality of voting system, whereby, a relative advantage takes all in most states for Congress and for the electoral college, is a disadvantage to the two-party, disadvantage to third parties. And then I would say, if you look back over the history of the United States and say, well, when have third-party candidacies been successful? For all intents and purposes, it's a handful of times. And at the national level, you couldn't define success except, I guess, with Teddy Roosevelt winning. I would say the other successes were, believe it or not, all seemingly, I would say, racially motivated. Who got electoral votes? George Wallace, Strom Thurmond, and that's about it. And I would say today we're not confronted with Strom Thurmond and George Wallace, but Donald Trump. And the question I would raise is, in a country that attracts so many people who come here, where you cannot deny the advancements that people of color have made. I mean, just in my lifetime, I went to segregated schools in Florida. My kids are going to Ivy League schools. I think progress has been made, but as a group, we are suffering under certain issues, and the issues are institutional, and when it comes to the two-party system, that's institutional. And I think I look at, well, how can we change that? And I say, well, use the resources that we have. And I say, well, what are the resources? Numbers, people. Well, why is that a resource that I think that it's underutilized? Because when you look at the United States, we don't top out at 65% participation of eligible voters. Forget the people who've been eliminated. I'm not saying forget them because they're not worthy. I'm saying from a mathematical perspective, if you don't include people who have been gerrymandered out or voter suppression out, just look at the people who theoretically the system says should vote or are eligible to vote, we don't exceed 65%. And I'm looking at statistics going back to 1916. We seem to be comfortable in this tribalism, and it varies over decades at a time where you get up close to 65% participation. My view is there is no excuse for a person not to vote or be able to make the better choice for given how they weight the issues. We should never be below 75% voting. I mean, I just find that unbelievable. And when you look at midterm elections, the average is around 40% participation. Why do the people like I say I participate, but I'm not happy with my choices. So I'm willing to build alliances and allegiances with people who may be opposed to what I want to have done on my 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th issue, but we can come together on my 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. That's my perspective.
All right. And it is clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
The thing is that if you listen to the news reports about voter suppression, tampering, all these different kinds of complaints, the last thing that you get as an impression is that these are crimes. These are crimes. When you have the deliberate interference with people's constitutional right to vote, and that in many cases is the reason that you have, quote, low voter turnout, unquote, because they do all kinds of manipulation with the voting. I have not heard in recent years of anybody being prosecuted for voter fraud, voter crimes. And that would go a long way to help with the integrity of the vote and to encourage people to believe that, yes, not only am I voting, but my vote is secure. My vote is protected. We don't have that feeling at all. And it's happening blatantly. We have a president who has been campaigning, which should be illegal. He should not be on the campaign trail. And now his daughter and his son are on the campaign trail, although they hold the public office essentially because they are paid advisors to the president. Should that be allowed? Should it be allowed when the president says these outrageous things? The media supposedly has standards of broadcasting and nobody's following it. So we have a lot of people, a lot of missing parts of this puzzle here where the integrity of the vote and the vote itself could be protected. And people don't seem to have the faith that that is what is happening in this time. I mean, and none other than the Democratic Party itself has chosen to overlook these things because many of their own people are committing these voting violations. So, when you have a place like Georgia, where you have widespread suppression of the vote, and the legislative Black Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, isn't filing lawsuits left, right, and center, isn't pressing for prosecution. There's a lot of stuff that has been going on that that has attacked the basic idea that your vote is safe, that it makes sense to vote because the vote has integrity. It's not happening. We have a bunch of crooks on both sides. And the only thing that they are concerned about is who's better at the crime, who's better at it, who would succeed at it, and who won't. We will continue to discuss these things, because this election should open our eyes to a lot of things that we should be talking about as conscientious citizens. And it should help us understand better what we need to do in order to get some kind of momentum in the right direction. But for the time being, I understand how overwhelming it must be, because these are very steep hills to climb. But I think we have enough examples to encourage us to persevere. And we ought to do just that. So tomorrow, Gerald Horne is with us, and we'll talk some more about the election. And I'm going to set aside as much time as possible for your questions tomorrow, because I know you want to interact with him. All right, so let's follow the news tonight and see what emerges as the result. Again, I don't think that we'll know the results of this election for a couple of weeks even, until a lot of kinks are worked out and a lot of information is gathered. But still, keep your eyes open. We'll see each other tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and for those who have contributed so meaningfully. Bye-bye.